Okay, this is going to be a presentation on the literature review, and the reason that I put this together is because we are steering our classes towards more review of the literature. You're reading articles rather than reading textbooks. The purpose of that is to prepare you to write the literature review, which is an integral component of the dissertation. So this lecture is going to talk about what the literature review is and also why it's so important. It's a critical element to deciding what your topic is going to be, and it's a critical element of producing your hypotheses. It's a critical element of justifying why your dissertation is valid and credible as a document. And so you really need to know how to do this, and we're finding that a lot of people don't really understand the process. In addition, not in this presentation, but in a separate presentation, there will be a presentation on how you do it. It's going to be available in a separate presentation. I'll do it later, but until that time, there is a fairly good presentation at this particular link. So you can click on that. It'll take you into a YouTube section where a professor at the Texas A&M University talks about the literature review and how to do it. So if you want to get kind of a preview of what will be available later, you can take a look at that. So in this presentation, we're going to be looking at what it is and why it's important. These ideas aren't mine. They're based upon a separate article called A Guide to Writing the Dissertation Literature Review by Justice Randolph, and this is also going to be available in the class so you can see the full document that this was taken from. So first of all, what's a literature review? Well, in brief, it's a summary and a synthesis. A summary because it covers all or most of the published material that's going to be the subject of your dissertation. It's also a synthesis, which means that it's a reorganization. It's simply not listing out all the different sources and saying, well, this guy said this, and this guy said this, and this guy said this, and this guy said this. But it's a synthesis. It's a understanding what they said and then putting them together to come up with new ideas, a new interpretation, perhaps of what has been said in the past, or you're combining new interpretations with old interpretations, or you might be looking at the history of a particular idea in a field and how it progresses, the differences of opinion, and you'll see this in all fields, whether it's a pure science like the origin of the universe. You'll go from a steady state theory to a Big Bang theory to some sort of a combination theory. You see it in social sciences where we're talking about leadership and various ideas about leadership and what's effective and what hasn't been effective and how that's changing. So people who study the field will have different ideas, and as part of the literature review, you are supposed to identify those. I think the literature review needs to identify the origins of whatever you happen to be working on. So even if you're working on something that is a relatively new interpretation of something, for example, in leadership, you want to work with shared responsibility leadership or reflective leadership or some of the new concepts or theories, you really need to trace back in the literature, where did they come from? They didn't suddenly emerge on their own. The people who came up with these new theories based them upon shortcomings in previous theories, and those were based upon shortcomings in or changes in situations that were reflected in the older theories. So really you need to understand and trace back, if you're going to do a competent literature review, where the origin of the theory came from. At some point it kind of started, and then it's progressed through changes and manipulations and contradictions through the ages, and a complete literature review should detail this evolution. When do you need a literature review? Well, obviously all dissertations are going to require literature review, but also most peer-reviewed journal articles will include a literature review, sometimes laid out as a separate section, identified as the lit review. Other times they're just incorporated, but generally all of the articles that you're rereading will include the basic history and other literature that's related to what their particular topic is. In fact, generally when you're reading an article, if there is no literature review, there's no citing of previous work that's been done in the field, generally it's not considered a scholarly article and would not be published in a peer-reviewed journal. Okay, it'll be considered popular press, meaning that it's based upon one person's opinion, but they're not showing the proof of where that idea came from or whether it's consistent with other theories in the field. As students, of course, the first question is, well, how long does it need to be? How much do I need to write? How many references do I need to find? Remember, you're going to be trying to assert yourself as an authority in the field, so the literature review has to be long enough to demonstrate that you have a solid knowledge of your topic and all the previous work that's contributed to it. As I said, I think the literature review really for a dissertation needs to trace the ideas back to the origin. Where do they come from and what things have been added over time to bring us to our current state, the thing that you want to study. It also has to be long enough or broad enough or complete enough to provide a foundation. You're saying this is what has happened and has been provided so far, then you're going to say, and on top of that, this is what I'm going to do. I think there's a gap, I think there's a missing piece to the puzzle, and I think what I'm going to do is use all this pre-existing theory and add something to it. So in general, long research papers will have long literature reviews, short research papers will have shorter literature reviews. Depending on the subject of your dissertation, you may have chosen a field that you could spend the rest of your life doing literature review on it, but that's why we try to focus people in on something that is going to be doable within your lifetime and hopefully shorter than that. So in general, lit review is similar to reference lists. Short articles have short reference lists, long articles have long reference lists. However, padding a lit review is not encouraged. In fact, it will be discounted if somebody who understands the field looks at your lit review and says, what are they putting this? This doesn't have anything to do with the subject. So you always have to be kind of looking at your audience, and if your audience is actually, in your dissertation it will be the case, your audience is a specialist and an authority in the field, they're going to be looking at it totally different than somebody who has no idea about what you're writing about. So if your committee looks at your dissertation and says, well, they're supposed to be writing about international trade and export theory, and here they have all this stuff in here about management. That doesn't have anything to do with it. They haven't shown that there's a connection between this, so don't add material that isn't relevant to what you're trying to do. Okay, why is it important? And again, there's going to be kind of some overlap and redundancy in these lists, but I just wanted to make sure you understood when you start working on this project about how critical it is that you do a good job. The literature review is your way of demonstrating that you know the subject, that you've looked at what other people have written, and that you are familiar with the vocabulary, the terminology that's used. You understand, not in just layman's terms, about something like, well, what is leadership or what is relationship marketing, but you understand how the people in the field use that vocabulary. You understand what the basic theories are, and this is extremely important. One of the reasons that a lot of our classes are now investigating the original theories that our current thinking is based upon. You need to understand those. You need to be familiar with those. You need to know who the people were that invented those theories. You need to be almost like their friends around the table. We talk in leadership, we talk about Burns, and we talk about Fiedler, and we talk about Blanchard and Hersey, and we talk about these people as if we know them because we've read all the work that they've done in the area. We know the methods and the history that have contributed to the field the way that it's thought of right now. So you become familiar with who the researchers have been and the research groups in the field. In leadership, you'll become familiar with the basic thinkers in the area of traits, and you'll become familiar with the thinkers in contingency or situational theory. You'll know that some of the work that we're still using today evolved out of some studies that were done at the University of Michigan and the University of Ohio. You'll know that the people at Michigan were Renesas Likert, and at Ohio was House, and you just become familiar. You're supposed to know, this field very well, and the literature review demonstrates that you have done your work. With a little bit of extra work, sometimes a literature review becomes a legitimate, publishable, scholarly document on its own. So there's another reason for it. If you're in a relatively new field and the literature is still being produced, there may not be a good compendium, something that summarizes the current state of the literature, and so your literature review may be, publishable, which is always a good thing. Okay, these again are going to look somewhat similar to the previous two, but the literature review helps define what your research problem, what you're trying to actually solve or find. It opens up perhaps new lines of inquiries. You've seen what other people have done, the directions of the streams of literature. It helps to avoid going down a path that you're not going to be able to complete. If nobody has written anything in a particular area about a subject, it's likely that you shouldn't approach that one either. It doesn't mean that's a research gap. It means it's a research dead end. You may gain insight. You may begin to understand the type of methodologies that are used in the particular field. You may use your previous research, your literature review, to identify where further research needs to go after you've added your little piece. And it's also a way of finding out, as I said earlier, where the original theory came from, what we call grounded theory. And some more reasons for the literature review. I'm not going to read through all these. You'll see some of these again sound like what we heard before, so I don't want to go over those. But again, they're perhaps a little different take on it, and it may mean something more to you than the previous ones. And finally, kind of in a summary, the literature review provides a framework for the discussion section, because now you can talk about what you've done versus what's been done before. And you need to know that. You need to know what's been done before. Without understanding that, how can you say that what you're doing is particularly new or is particularly important? Okay, so there's a lot of reasons for it. And as I said, one of the reasons we're dealing with literature and reading the literature and writing kind of mini literature reviews and article reviews is that you need to become familiar with those even before you get to your dissertation. Now, we're currently using a prospectus template, a way of getting your thoughts organized around how your dissertation is going to be produced. And what I'd like to do finally here is just kind of show how the literature review, as we've described in the previous slides, relates to the prospectus. So the first question in the prospectus template you have to answer is, what is your topic? The topic is a general area that you plan to do your research, and the reader of your prospectus would like to know right away, so what are you going to be researching? What are you going to be doing? Well, to choose what you want to do, you need to have some preliminary knowledge of the topic area. If you're in the leadership field or concentration or specialization, as we now call it, you're probably going to be working somewhere in the area of leadership, and you need to identify, which are the theories and which of the literature in the leadership field are of particular interest. So you need to know something about the field before you can begin to choose the general topic area that you want to work in. So that's important, and that should come from your coursework. How did you get to this topic? Well, here we start to talk about specialization and the primary stream of literature, which is going to be developed in your area of specialization, but it's not going to be the whole field. For example, if you're in marketing, it's not going to be the whole field of marketing, but it's going to be a subset of that field, a specialized area. And again, that's how do you find that area? How do you find what's been done in that area? That's what you do in the literature review. Then you're going to have your secondary stream of literature and perhaps a third stream of literature. Okay? And again, that's going to be coming out of the related body of literature. That's got to be developed through your lit review, that you understand these areas of the literature also. And that's one of the reasons that we try to avoid having students get too many different streams of literature involved, because they got to show their competency and authority in all these different streams. So if you say, well, I'm going to do something in international business, but I'm going to relate it to psychology, and I'm going to relate it to sociology, and I'm going to relate it to physical sciences, all of a sudden you've got to show that you're an authority in all those fields. So you want to stay close to your area of specialization. You want to choose a stream of literature that's close to it and also can be reasonably documented that you understand that area also. Our third question in the template is, how do the bodies of literature that you've just talked about, how do they frame the research question? What are you going to do that's going to add to this literature? And again, if you go back and look at the reasons for a literature review, the rationale and objectives, the literature review requires you to definitely show how previous research leads to a gap and the hypothesis that you plan to investigate. You can't avoid it. Finally, or fourthly, what is the research question? Here you're going to be forming your hypothesis, and it's useful in the literature review to have identified that other hypotheses that have been proven or disproven or remain unproven, things that you might want to investigate. Okay, and the literature review will reveal those also. How do I prove or disprove my research question? Here the literature review is very useful because it may identify methodologies and instruments that have been used that would be the thing that you would want to use in your study, what you're going to add. Okay, so if you work your way through the literature review objectives, as I've just talked about, and now the DBA prospectus is what you need to produce as you're starting to work on your dissertation, you'll see that the lit review supports all those areas, is required to validate that what you end up doing is a good subject, is doable, that you'll be able to answer it, that it's supported by existing research, and that it's going to be seen as valid and credible. So in summary, this presentation has dealt with the what and the why of the lit review. Again, you can't begin too soon. In fact, every time you read an article that's related to your field, that should go into a little mini database or a little list of yours as something that you might want to include in your lit review. Just see how it's relevant to what you want to do later. The lit review is a critical component of any scholarly work, sets the stage for developing your hypothesis, coming up with your research design, how you're going to collect your data, and also what your conclusions might be. So it's not an afterthought in the lit review. The lit review is an integral component throughout the entire dissertation process. As I said in the very beginning, this is the what and the why. The how to develop and research and write a lit review will be addressed in a separate presentation. Until that's available, you can use the link on the first page of this PowerPoint presentation to access that. Okay, good luck with it. If you have questions, want to get in touch with me, you know how to do that. Goodbye and good luck.